Day 743 of the Trump administration. We are covering the breaking news tonight on the Virginia governor and his admission that he is one of two people pictured in a racist yearbook photo. More on that coming up. But we do want to begin with Donald Trump, who arrived in Mar-a-Lago a few hours ago. It's his first visit to his Florida estate since Thanksgiving and his first since the government shutdown. Tonight, we're exactly 2 weeks away from the deadline to avert the next one. Members of Congress have been negotiating, as you may know, to try to avoid a repeat. But the president, as you also may know, calls those talks a waste of time as he steps up his campaign for a wall on the southern border. Today at the White House, he suggested wall planning is well underway while threatening to take action if Congress does not.
We are doing things right now. I mean, we're building it with funds that are on hand. We're negotiating very tough prices. We've designed a much better looking wall that is also actually a better wall, which is an interesting combination. It's far more beautiful and it's better. It's much more protective.
Have you privately decided whether or not you will declare a national emergency? And just to clarify,
if I privately, you know, what's in my mind?
What's in your
Well,
mind?
certainly thinking about it.
You're thinking ahead.
I think there's a good chance that we'll have to do that.
Late today, the president sat down with CBS News for an interview on Face the Nation, offered yet another preview of what could come next.
On the 15th, we have now set the table beautifully because everybody knows what's going on because of the shutdown. People that didn't have any idea, they didn't have a clue as to what was happening, they now know exactly what's happening.
Trump also appeared to step up his criticism of Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, who continues to insist the wall is immoral and there will be no money for it on top of that. An example, when asked about the Speaker's criticism of his administration's decision to pull out of that nuclear arms control treaty with Russia, the president's response had more to do with Pelosi's opposition to his wall.
Honestly, I don't think she has a clue. I really don't. I don't think Nancy has a clue. And I see that when she says walls are immoral. She doesn't have, she doesn't know. And I wish she did.
He indeed continued that criticism during the interview with CBS News.
I think she is very bad for our country.
She offered over $1 billion for border security. She doesn't want the wall.
She's costing the country hundreds of billions of dollars because what's happening is when you have a porous border and when you have drugs pouring in and when you have people dying all over the country because of people like Nancy Pelosi who don't want to give proper border security for political reasons.
Which somehow brings us to the curious case of Roger Stone. He was back in federal court today, appearing before federal judge Amy Berman Jackson. Actually, his lawyer was. He's charged with obstruction, witness tampering, and lying to Congress. Ever since his arrest a week ago today, Stone has been a ubiquitous presence on television, media of all kinds, really, comparing his case to a lynching, comparing the raid on his home to the raid to get bin Laden. And the judge has apparently noticed. She said today she's considering a gag order warning Stone, quote, against treating his pretrial proceedings like a book tour. She went on to say this is a criminal case, not a public relations campaign. Judge Jackson said, adding that she understands Stone wants to tell his side of the story. There's no question at this point he's had that opportunity. After she spoke those words, Roger Stone made media appearances, including showing up on Fox News tonight to talk about the possibility of a gag order.
The whole purpose of the gag would be so I don't poison a potential jury pool, but they've just poisoned a potential jury pool by making me look like El Chapo.
There's also this, a video Roger Stone posted on YouTube this week detailing how a gentleman should dress for an arraignment in federal court.
You have to think long and hard about what you're going to wear for your arraignment in U.S. District Court. You can't ever really do this in a double-breasted suit. It just doesn't ride up properly. This is called a Windsor collar or an extreme spread collar. Cuff links, in this case, onyx cuff links that were a gift from, I think it was my first wife, actually. You never button the top button unless you are 100% Italian, and I'm only half Italian. I'm Italian from the waist down. This kind of knit tie is an absolute requirement for every gentleman. I don't want to get into this too far, but of course I am wearing underwear. I was not going commando today, and that's how you dress for your day in court.
That's on YouTube tonight, courtesy of the Daily Caller. And with that, somehow, let's bring in our leadoff panel for a Friday night. Twitter's most prolific presidential fact checker, Daniel Dale, is with us. His day job happens to be as Washington correspondent for the Toronto Star. Barbara McQuade, veteran federal prosecutor, former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, back with us. And from the Washington Post, we welcome back veteran journalist Manuel Roig-Franzia. Good evening to all of you. Barbara, I have to start with you. It is a tour of bespoke clothing. At one point, he also mentions how poor he is when talking about the age of all of these items. But add all of it up, it can't go over well with a businesslike, law and order federal judge.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm not surprised to see the judge suggest the idea of a gag order. You know, in ordinary criminal cases that don't get a lot of attention, those would be unusual. But in high-profile cases, a gag order is appropriate. The judge has the discretion to enter a gag order to prevent the parties from creating a circus-like atmosphere, from preventing the defendant from getting a fair trial. Even she may be trying to save Roger Stone from himself, making all of these statements and tainting a jury pool that will come in later and have to pass judgment on him. So I think that she has asked the parties to state if they have any objection and why, and so she'll consider that. But it wouldn't surprise me to see her enter a gag order in a case like this.
Barbara, do you think he has a case when he comes back and says, look, this is who I am, this is how I've become Roger Stone, there's a documentary about me, and also, by the way, I'm raising money via these appearances for my legal defense fund?
I think what she's likely to say is that he can talk about things outside the scope of the case. You know, the First Amendment requires that if you're going to prohibit speech, it has to be narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling governmental interest. And so I think that she could say you can talk about anything under the sun. In fact, she even said today you can talk about foreign relations or immigration or even Tom Brady, but what you can't talk about is your trial. And so I think that he can talk about other things, just not his case.
Manuel, I knew the guy years ago here in New York. You have spent a lot more time with him and a lot more recently. Is there a perhaps wounded or scared inner Roger Stone, or is there just one layer? What you see is what you get, and this is our Roger Stone?
Brian, I just think that if you could go into a laboratory, pull out a petri dish, and create the most ungaggable human being that any person could imagine, what you would come up with is Roger Jason Stone Jr. He is a fire hose of words, and I would imagine that if this judge moves forward with what she seems to be indicating she wants to do is impose a gag order, she'll have quite a battle trying to enforce that with this particular defendant.
Barbara, one more for you before I come on up to Daniel, and that is, what are you telling your client if your client is Roger Stone? For that matter, what are you telling your client if your client is the President of the United States?
You know, I think most lawyers would tell their client not to talk about charges because you might say something and later decide strategically you want to take a different tack, and it can be very harmful to your case to say things when you don't have to. So most lawyers would say that. Now, when you are the president or maybe even Roger Stone, I think they realize that not only is the court of law where the decisions are going to matter, but also in the court of public opinion. And so sometimes, especially when you're the president, whose ultimate penalty would be impeachment as opposed to indictment, then maybe it's even more important that you get your message out in the court of public opinion.
So, Daniel, you're the Trump watcher here, and we come to you with the question, how much is all of this gumming up what would be the work of a fully functioning White House West Wing and staff?
You know, I don't think it does at this point. I think they're used to the circus. I don't know how well the staff functions at the best of times, so I wouldn't say that they're functioning well at this point. But I think they're able to tune out the legal drama unless the president is fuming about it. And just from the outside, it doesn't seem like he's especially concerned about the Stone matter. The Michael Cohen matter was something different. Certainly the Paul Manafort matter he was concerned about. But this one, I think he thinks is peripheral to his own situation. Whether or not it is, we don't know for sure at this point.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.